Author James Simpson unpacks his latest book, Manufactured Crisis: The War to End America, on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version you can find at Rumble, YouTube, Conservative Television of America, the Rose Unplugged Media Television Network, and the God Family and Country Television Network. Wherever you go, please subscribe, click that notification button, leave a rating and a review. I want to hear what you think about the show. There is an audio version. For the first 3 years, the show was audio only, and we had so many outstanding guests, over 180 high-profile guests. And what they said then is just as valid today. So if you go to radioinfluence.com, look for the United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford archive, where you'll find guests such as Kevin Sorbo, Tom Holman, Naomi Wolf, Morgan Brittany, Ben Carson, Mike Lindell, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Diamond and Silk, Gene Ho, Monica Crowley, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Judge Janine Pirro, Star Parker, Steve Turley, Brigitte Gabriel, and Carrie Lake. So if you go there to the audio version, you can find a lot of good stuff to listen to there. You know, I would really like to sing Happy Days Are Here Again. And I hope happy days are here again. But as you should know, evil does not stop. It doesn't quit. What it does, it reloads and comes back with a vengeance. And we're already seeing this. Donald Trump isn't even in the White House yet. And you can just see the forces of everything that is against we the people in the United States Constitution coming after, not him, they're coming after us because they were this close to their communist utopia. So there is a war on America, and that's what my guest has written about. So you ready to find out? Well, let's get into it. He's an economist, successful businessman, investigative journalist, former U.S. Congress candidate, and a best-selling author. He was here before when the show was audio only. He's back again. Glad to see him on video to talk about his new book, Manufactured Crisis: The War to End America. I welcome to the show Jim Simpson. How are you, Jim?
Hey, Gary. Great to be with you again.
And it's good to see you. Just so people will know, we were together about 3 weeks ago. I came on the Zoom that you were on, and boy, did you put out a lot of information. In fact, the information you put out was so terrifying, I had to sleep with the light on, and I'm a grown man. Okay? Now, that's a joke, but people will understand as we move on. So, the book starts out this way. As a professional economist, James Simpson is well placed to expose the economic sabotage that this great nation has been enduring for more than a century. However, Mr. Simpson goes way further. In a very straightforward way, he ties it all together. He analyzes all the major problems we face and looks for the common thread. And those problems are massive voter fraud, climate change scam, weaponization of our culture, indoctrination of our children, deliberate impoverishment of the middle class, the intentional fostering of racial divisions, the destruction of our borders, the systematic corruption of our government. I think you covered it all, Jim. So please tell people why you wrote this book, and boy, it is right on time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gary. Thank you. Yeah, I've been studying this issue since I got out of grad school in 1985. And it's always baffled me why anybody could be interested in so-called Marxism or communism, or what they like to the polite word they use now is socialism, but it's really all the same thing. Or it has an evolutionary endpoint that is all the same, and that is totalitarian government, where our rights are non-existent, and for that matter, our survival is under direct threat. And so I've been very interested in focusing on that since that time. And I've read countless books and I've done tons of research and I've been writing at various periodicals since 2002. And, in 2008, I came out with an article called Barack Obama and the Strategy of Manufactured Crisis. And that was a very viral video, and Glenn Peck picked that up, and a number of other articles that I wrote about it. And it was a strategy that was articulated by two, at the time, Columbia University professors, Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. And they wrote an article in the 1966 Nation magazine, and they outlined how they wanted to destroy the system by, in their initial case, overloading the welfare system with demands for public services, because they theorized that if all of the public services to which every person was entitled were taken, then the government would collapse of its own weight because it couldn't manage to afford all of those things. And they were reasonably successful. They drove the New York City government into bankruptcy in 1975. And then ACORN, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, which had been part of this effort to recruit welfare recipients onto the rolls, then took over and began spreading it into different areas, especially in voting and in the subprime mortgage crisis, which they were very deeply embroiled in, both in terms of getting Congress to pass laws and getting the government-sponsored enterprises, for example, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which your viewers may have heard of. These are government national government National Mortgage Association and the Federal National Mortgage Association, commonly called Ginnie Mae and Freddie Mac. Anyway, and they all created deliberately this crisis of mortgages, subprime mortgages, and it's what caused the 2008 collapse. And in the meantime, they're embroiled in all kinds of exercises in massive vote fraud, and the people who wrote the National Voter Registration Act, which enabled that vote fraud, it's commonly called motor voter, were themselves Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. So they focused on those issues, but really, when Obama came into office, all of the crisis strategies, as they have come to be called, just went into everything. And what's the greatest way to impose overwhelming crises on the entire nation? Well, that's to fling open the border and incite people from countries all over the world to come flooding into our southern border. And they did that, starting with Obama. They did that deliberately. And it's to overwhelm our society with problems that we can't manage. And then
Now, can I stop you right there for one thing? Because it's very important, I think, that people understand why they did this. Because they're saying, why would you do this? Isn't this like part of the communist plan? You create a crisis and then you come in You create a crisis, light the fuse, and then you ride in on a so-called white horse with the solution.
But the solution in one form or another is chipping away at our free society, moving us towards communism. You know, when Cloward and Piven uh, engineered the collapse of New York City in an attempt to collapse the governments throughout the United States, their solution was a guaranteed annual income for all people. And if done in today's dollars, that would have equated to between $40,000 and $80,000 per person. Now, this was supposed to replace the current welfare system. But as you know, once a program is established in the government, you have a heck of a time killing it. And there's not a single Democrat in the United States that would ever propose getting rid of any welfare program. So this would be added on top. And if you take the fact that one program itself would cost more than all the other programs combined, how is that not a way to even further the crisis and collapse of our government? So really, that's what they're all about, and it's going all the way back to Marx. There, you can articulate their agenda in one sentence: we want to destroy capitalism.
Right. Now, before you go on, because we're going to get into some of the issues that you go into the book, but people will sit there and say, why do they want to destroy capitalism? Because capitalism, people have things. There's money, there's an economy, there's flourishing. Why would they want to destroy that? And the only way you can destroy capitalism is if you have capitalism, because if you have socialism, you need somebody's money to pay for all these programs. So if you were poor, you wouldn't have any money to institute the programs. So why are they doing this? And the big question, Jim, there's all kind of people like first time I ever saw you were in the two of Curtis Bauer's movies, Agenda Grinding America Down and Agenda Masters of Deceit, about this, that go back to 10, 20 years. Why are we still falling for this?
Well, we're still falling for it for a number of reasons. One is it's not publicized nearly enough. I mean, the mass media suppresses that kind of information, or if it comes to the surface, they ridicule anybody who suggests it as a conspiracy theorist or some other kind of radical right-wing nut, and it's, I mean, it's right there in the public record. You can look it up and read it yourself, but most people don't want to be bothered with that. And they're also somewhat intimidated, or even a lot intimidated, by the media narrative that anybody that thinks anything like that has to be a racist or a bigot or, whatever expletive you want to use to define those people. People don't want to be associated with that. So even if they believe that you're telling the truth, in many cases, people will shy away from you anyway because they don't want to be associated with that and get painted with the same broad brush, simply because that is how the media treats us. That is how popular culture treats us. And, as you've seen, people lose their jobs, they lose their standing in the community. In some cases, they're even arrested. And people don't want to have to deal with that. They're afraid to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, the two issues that really piqued my interest for different reasons. One was the massive voter fraud programs, because that's treason. And the other was the fostering of racial division, because that's evil. And the extent that the powers that be that do this, and you'll tell us who that power is, or that power, what it incorporates.
Yeah.
Both of those are extremely destructive and have been just running rampant in our country. So do you want to break them both down?
Well, sure. Especially starting in 1920, the NAACP was founded by white socialists. No, there wasn't a black person on their staff, except W.E.B. Du Bois, who was himself a radical leftist, later
Right.
joined the American Communist Party, was
Sorry.
very sympathetic to the Soviet Union. But um, the idea, and this idea was communicated to America, the communist parties of the world, but America especially, because, the Soviet Union, founded in 1917, always saw the United States as, quote, the main enemy. And we were the main enemy regardless of how pacifistic we may want to be. It wouldn't matter if we were if we handed them the olive branch, and which we
Mhm.
did in uh, many times in our history. We were the enemy simply by existing, simply by providing the viable alternative to what quickly became seen as one of the most ghastly uh, types of government in world history. They even topped the Nazis in
Mhm.
terms of how horrific they were to their people. They were an equal uh, employment opportunity mass murderer. They just didn't single out the Jews and the communists and other. They didn't single out anybody. If
Are
you
we
ever,
talking Stalin, Lenin, and Stalin here?
yeah, we're talking Lenin and Stalin. Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't matter what the communist country is. What Lenin and Stalin did in imposing communism is what every communist country in the world has done or is doing, as in Venezuela, to its people. They're following the what's called the Revolutionary Catechism, which was something written in 1869 by a 22-year-old anarchist, but it included an order of execution for various classes of individuals throughout society that would be identified based on either their opposition or their usefulness to the regime. And those who were adamantly opposed, who you wouldn't be able to convince, they would be executed immediately. In the United States, Gary, I hate to say it, that's you and me. In and then there are different categories of people that would go through life, and all of the communist parties of the world instituted this, starting with Lenin's Soviet Union. And
So how does
so,
this tie in with our racial division?
okay, so sorry, getting back to that, the uh, the Soviets quickly put all of the communist parties under their roof with the Communist International, the Comintern, and they directed most of their all of their resources towards destroying the West, but most of them towards the United States because they correctly recognized we were the biggest threat. And one of the best ways to do that is, it's the old fashioned divide and conquer. They didn't want to have to deal with our military. We were much stronger than them, up into the 60s and maybe even the 70s. We were much stronger than them. There was never really, I don't think the Cuban Missile Crisis was such a crisis because the Soviets knew we could obliterate them if it ever came to that. But either way, um, they saw the best way to destroy the United States was through division, through dividing us. And we already had a ready made source of division in that we had had slavery, and there was still uh, um, segregation. There were still problems between, black and white America. And so they sought to inflame those divisions. And the best way they could do that is to keep Black people in the Black communities poor,
And angry.
downtrodden, and
And
angry.
angry.
And they
Yes.
said that. Why? They happy, happy, satisfied people won't serve them any purpose.
They won't be out in the street throwing bricks at people and breaking store windows and carrying in signs and riding with, yeah.
Right. That's what they wanted. And they started to agitate for that as far back as the 1920s. And I mean, there was the um, Booker T. Washington was the opposite of that.
Right.
Booker T. Washington
Had
was
been a slave, right?
he had been a slave, and he was an astonishing, really astonishing person, amazing.
Absolutely.
And he started this Tuskegee Institute.
Hmm.
He taught young black men how to uh, do a trade, taught them how to read, taught them all of the things, the skills that they needed to move ahead. And blacks were moving ahead. But the left came in and began saying, oh, no, 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 we don't want it that way. And from the 1930s forward, starting with FDR, they
Hmm.
initiated centralized welfare. And people say, oh, well, you can't get rid of welfare. Well, the fact of the matter is there had always been welfare, but it was um, administered by state governments, by local governments, and by churches. And so, in that sense, it was limited because states and, of course, churches and other, nonprofit or um, social welfare groups didn't have the money to create a massive welfare program. So it was the kind of thing that was there only when you needed it. But when first FDR and then Lyndon Baines Johnson
Johnson,
came out with the Great Society
the New Deal, yeah.
and the New Deal under FDR and Johnson's Great Society, it first it centralized that function, and then it widely expanded it, and that expansion went parabolic under Johnson. And so, and as I always say, I'm an economist. If you're a person of very limited means and you're given the option of receiving free food and free money from the government, basically, versus risking going out into the labor market and perhaps succeeding, but
Hmm.
perhaps failing as well. People are risk averse, and that's a natural tendency. And the thing is, the communists, they understand economics very well, actually. They really do. And they understand that that's a problem, that people are risk averse. It's a fundamental tenet of economics. People are risk averse. And so you have people, and they naturally gravitate towards that. And unfortunately, what's happened in the inner cities is that it's created an entire underclass. And nobody can tell me that the Democrats want to get rid of that underclass because for how many decades it's been a reliable voting bloc for them. I mean, when FDR started the New Deal and the welfare programs that came with it, most blacks were Republicans because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and the
Republican, right.
Republicans freed the slaves, right? And but then when all this welfare came in, blacks saw the central government under the Democrats as being more their friend, and so many moved into the Democrat Party. In the 60s, there were still about 30 or 40% of American blacks were Republican, but after um, Johnson's Great Society, that number was reduced to about between 3 and 5%.
And it does nothing. It doesn't help. And now Donald Trump comes along and said, "Hey, give you dignity. You can get a job. You can start a business." And people are trying to get people off that Democratic Party plantation. And exactly like you just said, people just give me my crumbs. I can't believe this even now. And now, not only do I have to take the crumbs, I have to take abortion. I have to take all the same stuff. I have to take men trying to play in women's sports. You know, all the socialism, all the God removed from the workplace, the government, and the schools. When I'm claiming to be a Christian, going to church, throwing my hands up in the air, waving like I just don't care for Jesus on Sunday, and then the rest of the week voting against everything he stands for. This is sickening to me.
It is. Oh, it's absolutely sickening. And you know, as you know, um, became a senator, uh, Patrick Moynihan. He was working for Nixon when he wrote this report in the 60s on the threat that welfare placed to the nuclear black family. And he saw it was already starting to happen. And he saw that as a serious threat. And he basically predicted everything that was going to happen. And that report, Johnson, when he first read it, he, or no, actually, he was working for Johnson at the time. When Johnson first read it, he said, "Oh, this is good," and then he realized that it was going against his entire agenda, and so he had it suppressed, and it didn't come out for many years until many years after that. But it was a very prescient report, and Daniel Patrick Moynihan later ran for U.S. Senate in New York and became a senator, a Democrat. I don't know why, but anyway, he had worked for Nixon for a while. But it was that was just an amazing example. We knew then what the problems could be because the church attending black nuclear family was what kept
Destroyed, right?
The inner city society together, and it was very tight, and they were making a lot of progress, and the welfare state just blew that right out of the water.
Right.
And you know, in the book, I have an entire chapter devoted to it's called "Weaponizing the Poor: The War Against Black America," and I almost made it its own book because I think it's worthy of it. You know, it's just astonishing that the Democrats could be so malevolent and selfish, really, just selfish.
I hear you. Well, I want to change the script here because Trump won. Uh, I'm going to change about the massive voter fraud programs and what got us there, and get to what is probably the biggest problem in America, which is not the economy. Because if you can't close a border, and if you have open borders, you're not going to have an economy sooner or later. So tell people about the destruction of our borders. And do you agree that that is the major thing that we have to deal with right here, right now?
Yeah, I think we got to deal with that day one. I mean, that's absolutely, the border has to be sealed. I mean, you don't have a border, you don't have a country. How do you define a country without a border? You know, yeah. And
what do you say in the book about the destruction of the border? How and why is this happening?
Well, it's actually been happening for more than a decade. It's actually been happening for many decades. You know, starting with the 1965 Immigration and Nationalities Act, which changed the entire complexion of immigration as being something that would benefit America by bringing in skilled people that we needed to fill various jobs. It then turned to an immigration program. Teddy Kennedy wrote that bill, by the way, that enabled people from all over the world, every culture, every society, to come into the United States. And of course, we still had the laws requiring them to learn English and understand the Constitution, but that has been chipped away at successively over the decades, so it's hardly not even required anymore. But that's where it started. And then the 1980 Refugee Act switched the Refugee Act from people fleeing communism to allow in people who were communists fleeing the governments that were going after them. Yeah, it was part of the reason. But the other part was to just expand the refugee program to greatly increase the number of refugees from this country. And you laugh when I say uh, we were trying to keep out the communists. Well, Governor Jerry Brown in the 70s, when first time he was governor, he actually tried to stop a plane load of refugees from Vietnam from landing in California. And he said, oh, well, they're going to take our jobs and all this. He wasn't concerned about that. He knew that Vietnamese fleeing communism were never going to vote Democrat.
Right.
And so Carter signed the 1980 Refugee Act, which basically flipped the entire script on that. And then we began to see an influx of people from countries who really were enemy countries, and then just people coming from all over the world. And what's the problem with that? Is that because I'm a bigot or an Islamophobe or a xenophobe? That's the word, the xenophobe. No, it's because our government's job isn't to open the door to the world's populations. Our government's job is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to make this fertile ground for the American people to pursue the American dream. And when you start bringing in people from all over the world, you have culture clashes everywhere. You have language issues everywhere. There are over 400 languages spoken in public schools in the United States today. In some individual schools, there are as many as 130 languages spoken. How does a teacher deal with that? How does the ESL teacher deal with that? Many of these languages are languages that nobody's ever heard of. They're local dialects that nobody understands. How do you deal with that? And it puts a burden on the schools, it puts a burden on the community, and all of these people are going to be welfare, recipients. And so it creates all kinds of problems. And now,
Jim, one problem that it creates to me that really, when I look at it,
yeah.
They come across with the flag of the country they're leaving. Leave that in Mexico. Leave that on the other side of the border and take up American flag. They don't do that. And the people that come across legally, they're coming here to become an American. We don't know what these people are doing. And what I don't understand, maybe you can explain this to me. I've asked this to about 15 guests. I can't wrap my head around why people watch this nightly on the news and it hasn't been the issue it should be.
Yeah, no, that's really, that baffles me as well. Although I think it actually is. I think that is actually one of the big issues that put Trump over the top in this election by such a wide margin. I mean, I really think people said, this is just too much. But it's amazing, many of the people that I talk to in a political sphere, they're like, oh, this is just another issue. And it's like, it doesn't affect them directly. So they don't.
It will.
I know. It's just simply astonishing the level of ignorance and the level of apathy there is about it. It's mind-boggling, frankly, because that is probably the single greatest threat we face right now. I mean, we all know that tens of thousands of communist Chinese young men have passed into the country, obviously of military bearing. There are people from other countries similarly disposed. We have foreign armies in the United States now, and God knows when that's going to when their actual agenda is going to reveal itself. I actually thought we might be facing some kind of major internal conflict before the election that would give the Democrats the excuse to postpone or
On the
suspend.
election. Yeah.
But it
I
didn't
thought that
happen.
was
I'm
coming.
grateful
Yeah.
for that. But it's still, I mean, we won by substantial margins. I mean, President Trump won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College. But in my mind, if really people had been paying attention and had been fully informed of how much of a crisis it really is, he should have won 80 or 90% of the population,
He should have won that anyway, just because of what they were running on.
Yeah,
Jim,
that's true.
war on America, it's been going on, as you say, for a century. Are we going to win this thing? And what has to change for us to win? Getting Trump in there helps. It's a start. But can we win this? And what can we do as private citizens to help win this?
Well, that's for your audience. That's the title of my book, and that's what the cover of it looks like. I think it's kind of fitting, given what we've been through in recent years. But yes, no, Trump was an essential, a necessary but not sufficient in beginning to recapturing our culture and our society. And really, I mean, there are immediate term things we need to do. There are midterm things we need to do, and there are long-term things we need to do. And I have a very extensive last chapter titled "What is to be Done," where I talk about all the things that we need to do in order of priority. And the first one is definitely to seal the border, and to send as many of the illegals that have come across our border in the last 4 years back to their home country as possible, as many as possible. And the hard part will be finding them. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, well, the Health and Human Services Department they actually have a program for illegal aliens where they house them and they feed them and then they line them up with families in the United States. I mean, this is actually something we all pay through. And there's the office, it's called the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and it's not refugee, it's illegal aliens and refugees. But they know where most of the people that they have sent to different places throughout the country are. They know where they are. They have the records. Getting them to divulge them will be an interesting chore. Whoever is running that component of HHS will have his or her hands full with that job. But those people have to be found, and especially the ones of military age, especially the communist Chinese, the Cubans who came here, the Venezuelans, and the people from some of the Muslim countries that sponsor terrorism. Those people are going to have to be found and sent out of here post haste. And the same
Give
is
us
true.
one more thing that has to be done. If that's one, what else immediately has to be done?
Well, immediately we have to seal the border. We have to reform our voting laws. We have to clean the voter rolls. And I would say repeal the National Voter Registration Act, which is essentially an unconstitutional law to begin with, and just repeal that. That will solve a lot of problems, and it'll put it back into the states. And the states need to be encouraged, if not arm twisted, to pass voter ID laws and voting day voting, no mass mail-in ballots, only for people who are overseas or in extenuating circumstances should mail-in ballots be allowed, because they're the greatest source of vote fraud, and I believe that That was the primary way, though not the only way, the Democrats stole the 2020 election. And of course, I have a whole chapter about that. You can read about all the other ways they played
Yes,
games with the
indeed.
election.
Well, Jim, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Always do. Please tell people where they can get your book and
Okay.
anything else you'd like to promote.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Um, my book is available at Amazon. It's available at Abe Books. It's available at Indie Books. It's available at Barnes and Noble, but only in Kindle version. Um, you can go to my website, which is crisisnow.net. That's an easy one to remember and easier to find than finding me on Amazon. So go to crisisnow.net, and they have links through to Amazon of all my best-selling books. That one, the book on Karl Marx, the one on immigration called The Red Green Axis. So you can find all those on my website, crisisnow.net, and or go to Amazon and order it directly through Amazon. If you
And if
want
people
to
want to reach you,
if you want to get a signed copy or reach me for some other reason, send me an email at simpson.truth@gmail.com. That's simpson.truth@gmail.com.
Jim, it's been great talking to you. People need to read this book. They need to understand what's going on because we're getting ready to handle some business. And this is war because the elements of evil and of trying to break down the Constitution and change our country forever, they were so close. And they're not going to quit. You can see that right now. They're doubling down. So we're going to have to put them down. So I thank you for who you are, and I thank you for what you do. And I ask that you just keep up the great fight.
Thanks so much, Gary. Great to be with you again.
There you have it, everybody. Mr. Jim Simpson. I want to thank author James Simpson for coming back on the show and unpacking some elements of his new book, letting us know that happy days may be here again, but we're going to have to go through a war to keep it because there's a war in America. It's been going on for 100 years. They were so close to spiking the football in the end zone. They are not going to quit now. So we're going to need to get behind our president, behind Donald Trump, behind his cabinet, and behind everybody that's for we the people, for keeping the Constitution of the United States, to retain our liberty and our freedom, because the forces that are against us, they're not going down without a fight. So, James, thank you for who you are, what you do, and keep up the good fight. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version, you can find at YouTube, Rumble, Conservative Television of America, the Rose Unplugged Media Network, and the God, Family, and Country Television Network. Hope you subscribe. Click the notification button, leave a rating and a review. Make sure to tell us about the show. Well, that's it for now. So thanks for joining us. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.